Welcome to Keeping It Green, a podcast for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts with hosts Margaret Pickoff and Sandy Feather.
Hello, and welcome to the Keeping It Green podcast, a podcast from Penn State Extension for ornamental plant professionals and enthusiasts. I'm one of your hosts, Margaret Pickoff. I'm a horticulture educator with Penn State Extension, and each episode I'll be joined by one of my colleagues on the green industry team as a co-host. So on today's episode, my co-host is Sandy Feather. Hi, Sandy.
Hey, Margaret. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty well. So on today's episode, we're going to be joined by Frank Pizzi, formerly of the Pittsburgh Zoo and PPG Aquarium. But before we get to our interview with Frank, we like to start out with a little chat between educators just about what we're seeing in the field or thinking about at this time of year. So Sandy, what are you seeing or what are you hearing about?
Well, we did have a few days ago, we had some pretty severe weather just south of the Pittsburgh area, like with big hailstones that caused property damage, roofs and cars and so forth. Fortunately, a little further north where I live and work in Pittsburgh, we didn't really have anything like that, but we did have really high winds and a lot of rain. My property was okay, but I did have all my leaves cleaned up, but of course I'm one of those people that uses them to mulch beds with, and now they're back all over the place. So I'll be cleaning up leaves again at some point.
Nice.
How about you?
Well, we haven't gotten any real winter weather here in the Philly area. I have been noticing around my neighborhood in West Philly these really stunning Japanese maples. And I always kind of forget that after all of the other sort of the display of other deciduous trees, we've got a lot of London plane trees around here, lots of oaks. After those are all done, these Japanese maples just stick out. They're so brightly colored. And I was up at Andorra Meadow, which is part of the Wissahickon natural area in Philly. And it's an area that used to be a nursery. So as you're walking on the trail in the woods towards this meadow, there's this perfect line of these like very fancy Japanese maples in the woods, and it looks so beautiful. So that's something I noticed. But we're gearing up for, the winter is just around the corner. So.
And unfortunately, what we had here is we had really warm weather and then boom, it got cold. So a lot of the plants, it's like the leaves kind of freeze dried on them. I noticed that on my winterberry hollies. Now, the high winds we had a few days ago just ripped those dead leaves right off. But we didn't really get to enjoy the Japanese maples like that because the leaves just kind of got killed right on the plant. So
I see. Yeah, we're lucky down here.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah. Oh, great. Well, let's welcome Frank Pizzi onto the show. Frank is the former curator of horticulture and grounds at the Pittsburgh Zoo and PPG Aquarium. So welcome to the show, Frank.
Glad to be here.
Thanks so much for coming on. So we'd like to start out by just asking if you can just describe your former role at the zoo. So what were you responsible for?
Well, as is often the case for nonprofits, particularly in our situation where we transitioned from a Department of City Parks in 1995 to a separate private-public partnership, you wear a lot of hats. And so my primary hat was the care and maintenance of our 77 acres of horticulture, of developed exhibitry and the parking lot and everything else. So I had staff that handled the plant end, and I had another staff that handled the grounds functions, which included delivering animal feeds, collecting manure, picking up trash, cleaning the restrooms, setting up for events. We were a busy little department.
And so your field is zoological horticulture.
Yes.
And so obviously, you just described the many hats that you wear, but if you had to explain and our podcast and our work really is geared towards the green industry and folks who work in the landscape and maybe more traditional horticultural landscape settings. But how would you describe zoological horticulture? What does it entail? Because you've got your plants and your animals, and in our field, we're usually trying to make it so that the plants stop eating the animals wherever we are in our ornamental horticulture. So how is that different in your field?
Well, it's an odd sort of combination of your skills and knowledge as an ornamental horticulturalist, which is the degree I have from Penn State University. There isn't yet any kind of formal education in the field of zoological horticulture. What you do is basically, because of the transition from zoos in the last 30 years, from pretty much menagerie collections into exhibits that make every effort to display the animal in a habitat, a landscaped space that, as close as you can, approximates where that animal lives, to recreate its neighborhood, and then in the same instance, envelop both the animal and the visitor into a landscape that sort of mimics that landscape, so that you have a better understanding, since we know that people don't like to read, a better understanding of how that animal interacts, how that animal evolved to be the way it is, to look the way it is, to eat what it eats, to be designed the way it is, because it was all that give and take with how it interacted with where it lived. And the plant material obviously is a key part of that habitat. So in designing habitats, shortly after I arrived, we were in the midst of a big master plan changeover of Pittsburgh from a menagerie collection of caged animals with no relationship to their natural habitat, was to help the design team pick the right plants to put in and around the animal exhibit so it made sense, that you didn't have tigers from the cold climates of the Amur Valley in northern Asia surrounded by stuff that people could see in their own backyard. Just didn't make any sense. It's that disconnect.
So you saw quite an evolution in your time at the zoo, from the menagerie collection. And I don't know, I imagine at that point you were just kind of planting things that were pretty for the visitors to see rather than creating a habitat.
Well, yeah, I mean, the Pittsburgh Zoo in its heyday, when that original yellow brick huge building with the wrought iron wings was built, was state-of-the-art menagerie collection for a city-run facility.
Mm-hmm.
The last remnant of that building was torn down shortly after I arrived in the early 80s. And at that time, looking through what is now the lion display window into their habitat up on that rise, which has been completely regraded, you could still see a wing of that yellow brick building, all of which is gone now. So yeah, I mean, we basically transitioned that entire landscape from what it was in the late 70s to early 80s into what it is today. So there is almost no part of that 77 acres, with the exception of parts of the parking lot, that we didn't regrade, re-landscape at least once, if not twice or three times.
So I'm curious about the design process for these habitats, because again, we sometimes work with garden designers, and so I think we know a little bit about the design process for an ornamental landscape. Obviously, you have a lot of considerations here. As you mentioned, you're thinking about the habitat that these animals originally were, that you described as their neighborhood, which I really liked. But also, you're in Pittsburgh, which is also not Northern Asia or Africa. And I gather from, I've never been to the Pittsburgh Zoo, but I gather from the website that there are animals from all over the world. And so given the sort of climatic and environmental sort of restrictions that you have in the Pittsburgh area, how do you translate that into sort of giving visitors and animals the sort of feel that they are in their home habitat? Do you have to, it's finding plants that sort of serve the same function in the landscape or look similar? How does that work?
Well, it you rely a lot on your own research. I know the usual team that zoos bring together to design, say, a new animal habitat would include architects, engineers, animal behaviorists, veterinarians, and if they're lucky, a horticulturist is at the table from the very beginning. Because by the very nature of who we are and how we do what we do, whether it's designing someone's garden or someone's vegetable patch or an animal habitat, we tend to step back and look at the big picture. And the big picture is, what part of the world does this animal come from? What kind of climate does that area share with where we are? How can we sort of tweak things? For instance, where the Amur tigers are from, if you just sort of wrap around the globe, their habitat, their climate is not too dissimilar from Western Pennsylvania. So we relied heavily on creating a sort of mixed species, deciduous coniferous forest, using wherever we could trees primarily that either grew there, like species of birch trees and various needled evergreens, or things that were related within those families that would take the climate changes, the microclimate, particularly here in Pittsburgh in the inner city, in this bit of a valley where we sit, where the zoo sits. So, those parts, that was one of the easier exhibits to replicate. And of course, grasses are important in almost every habitat for various reasons. We wanted to have as much vegetation as we could in and around the tiger exhibit so that the docents and our graphics could talk about why it is that tigers are striped the colors that they are. Well, how does that make any sense when they're surrounded by green trees in one part of the year and lots of snow in the other part of the year? And you talked about how the tiger's paws have lots of fur between their little toes. It's its own native snowshoe. They have a very dense 2-layer coat that they can withstand temperatures that boggle my mind because I don't like the cold. So you could talk about that pattern of dappled sun and shade, particularly when the trees are leaved out, and how that sort of helps the tiger move through the forest. It also helps if you realize that their prey can't see that orange color at all.
Oh,
I didn't know that.
Yeah,
no.
you can thank PBS for that information.
Yeah.
And Richard Attenborough did a whole piece recently on what animals see, the color in the environment, and how animals and insects interact with it. And so their prey can see movement, but they can't see those stripes. So the dappled patterns of sunlight and shade helped the tiger sneak up on lunch, if you will. So we have to consider all of those things. We have to consider things like keeper access, how we plant, where we plant, what it is, where we put it, how it's going to grow. We have to consider, does this animal, can it climb trees? Can it climb up and out over this very expensive high fence? Do we have trees that are prone to damage in winter weather? So a big branch falls down on the fence and the tiger climbs out and goes up to the plaza and has lunch. You have to consider all those things.
Right.
Plus, when you're exhibiting, designing an exhibit for herbivores, animals that eat plants,
Right.
you are again using plants that replicate the environment that animal comes from. Maybe not anywhere near related to the plants that the animal's used to eating. So animals in their native habitat develop a knowledge, if you will, of what plants are good to eat, what are not good to eat, or a tolerance to chemicals that plants produce, since every plant is a little chemical factory. So you have to be ever cognizant of the fact that the plants that you picked from, say, the steppes of Canada and America up there, those middle states, might be toxic to an animal that was born and raised in northern China or from Africa, because they've never encountered those plants or even that family of plants. What we found, unbeknownst to most veterinarians who were nervous wreck when zoos first transitioned from animals in concrete and ceramic tile that were easy to keep clean and sterilize. And suddenly exhibitors, zoo designers were saying, okay, well, we're going to put these animals outdoors on grass and dirt. Veterinarians started to get a little nervous about that, because then they were also concerned not only about soil-borne organisms, but what the animals might eat, because they no longer had complete control over the animal's diet. What I found, and a lot of my plant friends in the industry found through the years, is that the animals were a lot more savvy than many people gave them credit for. And it was very rare that we had instances of animal poisonings from zoos because they were eating plants they shouldn't have. There were one or two instances early on. People paid more attention. Invariably, it was a case where the animal was just bored out of its mind, and so it started to sample things that it otherwise wouldn't have eaten. And I got, a little tummy upset or brought it back up again and made everybody nervous. But yeah, you have to be cognizant of that, because we all know that there are certain plants that are in fact very toxic to cats and to dogs and small unsupervised children, whatever.
Right.
So you need to be careful about that. But it's primarily a case where you want to try and give the visitor a snapshot of a day in the life of that animal, where it lives. And if you can, where it lives, what it eats, and how it gets it. And if you're lucky, they go away with some new knowledge and understanding of that interconnectedness of living mammals and plants. So yeah, it was always a challenge, but it was always, was fun with the limits of budget, of course.
For the herbivores, did you ever particularly spec stuff specifically for them to eat?
You mean sacrificial plants?
If you will, yes.
Zoos that had larger exhibit spaces,
okay,
would often do that. Disney, of course, because they have an unlimited budget, does that in their animal kingdom. We do provide what in our business is called browse. So as we're pruning and maintaining the plant collection around the zoo, we know we have developed lists of plants for XYZ herbivorous animal that we know that they like and that we know is safe. I mean, all this has to be cleared through the veterinary department, because they are the final arbiters of what is safe and not safe for the animals. So we learned early on that unfortunately most of our animals, given the opportunity, would decline eating things like Japanese knotweed.
No, darn.
Yeah. Well, they just got bored with it very quickly. So that elephants get really bored with bamboo very quickly. They would prefer to play with it and run around and wave it in the air. But giraffes like the bamboo because it's basically a grass. So yeah, there were things we would harvest. If we had more space, as some zoos do, we could develop a whole browse farm. So that you can, not only does that give the animal a better nutrition, but it also then helps the public sort of connect the dots. They don't eat just little nuggets of food from a manufactured thing with all of its vitamins and minerals, like chicken nuggets, God forbid. You begin to help them understand, an animal has the opportunity to move around and pick some of this and some of that, some of this, some of that for different reasons. We've learned years ago that gorillas, for instance, particularly pregnant gorillas, will have dramatic changes in their diet through their pregnancy, of the kinds of plants they eat and in the quantities of what they eat. So the challenge then is, how do we mimic that in a captive setting? Because at the end of the day, they're still captive animals, and our responsibility is to keep them as physically and mentally healthy as possible. And so that often means, the browse is a form of diversion. It's you hide stuff, you hang stuff, you move stuff around so that you can, give them more activity in an average day.
I was kind of curious too about, speaking of kind of normal animal behaviors, and we kind of all established before we started recording that we're all cat people. So we have cats around, and they sometimes, you know, they scratch things and that's part of their normal behavior. And that can lead to it's damage to my couch, for example, or other household items.
Yeah.
I remember hearing that when I lived in New Jersey, that the Cape May Zoo would ask people to donate their used Christmas trees after the holidays as part of scratching material for their big cats. And you had mentioned sacrificial plants, and and so I kind of wonder, you know, the damage control in these habitats is probably very different. Well, definitely very different from, you know, the deer browsing and the groundhog damage and the voles that we see in the ornamental landscape. So are those, do you sort of have an idea of what trees and plants these animals tend to damage in their normal behavior and just plan to let those die after a while and be replaced? Or is there an effort to sort of, because you also have to balance, you do want I'm sure the habitat to be a beautiful visual experience for your visitors too.
Right.
And so you don't want a bunch of damaged branches hanging down. So yeah, I guess I'm curious about damage control versus allowing these animals to sort of do their natural behaviors.
Well, yes, you know, trying to foster natural behavior in these exhibits is one of the key, you know, sort of a cornerstone of what we're trying to do. When zoo horticulturalists meet annually and get together, we usually cry and moan about the same sort of thing. One is animal damage to the plants in the exhibit. Two is keeper damage to the plants in the exhibit. Those are pretty universal across the country. So what we often talk about, you know, paper presentations at our conference are various unique ways that we've all found to put sometimes very expensive and difficult to find plant species in these habitats, and then to protect them from, you know, the over interaction with the animals that live there. So, you know, the big trees in our any of our big cat exhibits, tigers, lions, whatever, are generally, in our case, wrapped with vinyl coated, basically chain link, which we inspect annually and move around if we have to. In the gorilla exhibit, we have two huge old specimens of Glitzitzia, honey locust trees that are, you know, perfect for that habitat. They're enormous. They've been there forever. The fact that they survived construction of the exhibit is a miracle that I still can't really get my head around. But anyway, they did. So what we had there originally were some fabricated things that looked like tree bark that went up around the tree as high as we thought the gorillas could reach, and then insinuated in there. You may have seen that woven copper cabling that's used for lightning arresting in trees. We use that as sort of a conduit for a low voltage intermittent charge, a hot wire, if you will. So when the gorillas would go over and attempt to climb the trees, because we couldn't have them do that, they could get up the tree, onto the roof, and then into East Liberty, which wouldn't be good. So that worked for a very long time. And at the time, it was sort of cutting edge for tree protection, because from the visitor's perspective, the distance, they really couldn't tell that it wasn't tree bark with a dead vine that had sort of gone up there. So you'll see that in a lot of zoos. You'll see, you know, for things like in exhibits with giraffes, which of course we want people to see them feeding overhead out of trees, because that's why they look the way they do. You'll see fields of large to intermediate random boulders in sort of irregular circles that extend out from the tree trunk itself. So since giraffes have evolved to live in open grasslands of Africa, not really all that rocky, and, you know, their head's way up there, their feet are way down here, they don't like to pick their way through uneven surfaces, because that the tendency there is that they're not paying attention to what's sneaking up behind them, and they're too busy watching where their feet are. So they just don't go there. So that keeps them away from the bark of the tree, and it limits them to the edge of the tree in terms of doing some feeding, where zookeepers can then extend with some apparatus net bags full of browse that they can eat. So there are all kinds of tricks to do that. I mean, rhinos, for instance, like to rub against trees and scratch themselves. Rhinos are a little heavy. They can do some serious damage to trees just rubbing their butt on them. So again, those rock fields are just enough usually to discourage that behavior, to keep them away, and you give them something else, like in our case, concrete termite mounds for them to rub up against that they can't really damage. So there are all kinds of tricks, and it varies from species to species as to what you do. Although the whole concept of a hot wire or hot grass is pretty extensive. It's marketed now, really thin little pieces of wire that are practically invisible from the public's perspective that you stick in the ground, and then they're connected. And you can form those in sort of an irregular shape around your planting bed full of pricey things that you don't want them to eat. So when the animal comes by and starts sniffing around, they get a little zap on their nose, and they immediately say, well, that's not a good thing. And they go away if you're lucky. It took us a long time to get that to be used in a lot of zoos because keepers, bless their hearts, are very passionate about their animals and not doing anything that might cause their animals any discomfort or harm. And so, we had to help them convince them that the animals aren't going to continually go back to that area and get a little zap. And I emphasize that it is a little zap. It doesn't make you don't like go jittering like on the TV commercials. It's just enough for them to say, I don't like that, and I'm not going.
Training.
Yeah. I mean, so that has worked very, very well, as long as people remember to turn it on.
It's probably like the invisible fence that people use for dogs now.
Yes.
So that probably has maybe helped the keepers accept that kind of training behavior.
Well, it has, and it really varies. I mean, the charge that you have for, say, an exhibit with zebras or varieties of antelope is very, very, very low. Charge you have in an exhibit with a rhino, actually rhinos really don't care.
Okay.
Elephants has to be significantly more, shall I say, assertive.
Okay. That makes sense.
Right. And I can speak to that personally because, one day I was in the elephant yard and I was assured by the keepers that the hot wire had been turned off. Oops.
Oh, Frank, come on.
Well, I think anyone who's worked on a farm with animals has probably had that same experience of, no, the fence is off. Don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. And, I was a little surprised that it was so hard to convince them when the idea of hot wire in the farming industry and agriculture has been around for goodness knows how long.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But, it took a little convincing. It still does for some of them. So, but it works. And so, you can never be sure. So you just hope that, this tree that you've searched and searched and searched for a long, long time and grew on in the back until it got to a right size is going to be protected. And generally it is, sometimes not. We will also then, as we cut things down that die of old age, or in this case, some disease, we'll put larger log pieces in, particularly into the African lions and tigers. Just lay them on the ground and sort of anchor them in, excuse me, so that they can actually scratch their claws on them. And so they will use that a lot.
Oh, that's nice. Nice. And that's a nice reuse of something too.
Yeah. Well, if you remember, Sandy, St. Margaret's Hospital, some years ago now, when they redid their parking lot to make it even bigger, they cut down a bunch of big maples and oak trees. And the neighborhood was just up in arms until we called the hospital and said, "Oh,
We'll
hey,
take
what
'em."
are we going to do with those things? We can use those to build this climbing structure in our gorilla yard." Well, they were delighted because then they could tell the neighbors, "Look what's happening." So
That's
Davy
great.
Tree actually helped cut them down and help transport them. And then we had to bring in a huge crane to boom it over the gorilla wall and put them in there. And we're into the now probably the third or fourth iteration of that climbing structure using trees that we managed to find.
That's great.
just
That
let them
really
rot.
is great. Did you, when they cut down all those trees on the Oakmont Country Club, did you get any of them?
No, they were very circumspect about cutting the trees in the Yukon country club. No.
Yeah, but they did take a lot of them out.
Oh, they did.
Oh,
They
yeah.
did. We were unfortunately too late.
Okay.
But that
'Cause
would have been a
that
boon.
again, that might have made it more palatable to the people who live there.
Sure. But golf. I hope there are no golfers listening, but I consider the waste of a
Doesn't
good
tend to be a
afternoon
golf crowd.
on a chemically supported monoculture. Just
Yeah,
my personal opinion.
I think Mark Twain referred to that as a good walk spoiled, but
Yeah.
This is what differentiates our podcast from the turf grass podcast that our colleagues do.
Oh, well, yes. Although
Um,
I would wager they probably changed a lot too. And I remember now when I first heard them being convinced to use finely screened compost as a top dressing on some of their greens as a deterrent to certain fungal infections when, they started to lose access to all these fungicides that they'd used for years.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
I
hey,
do,
speaking of compost, I would imagine there's quite a bit of manure in a zoo. So
Yes.
were you able to actually compost and use it on site?
No, we were so limited as to space. Sandy, we tried, we anguished over that for a very long time. And then, when it became illegal to include all that organic waste into the regular landfill, which where it had gone for years before my arrival, we finally did. Well, at that point, AgriCycle was just starting their business.
Okay.
Big recycling firm here in town. So we were one of their first clients where they got, a good bit. I mean, they would take all of our herbivore manure, not the carnivore, not the gorilla, but all the other herbivore manure and straw bedding would go into a separate dumpster, and then they took it all and composted it. And we did that for years, because we just did not have the space required to compost that volume, because it takes time to go through the whole process. So no, we were never able to do that. We did get product back from AgriCycle, that compost, which is still, I think, one of the best products around, to use as we developed new exhibits or rehabbed old exhibits. So yeah, we did use that wherever we could.
Okay, thank you.
I think it now goes to an organic beef production, cattle production.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, delightful
Wow.
guy.
That's so interesting. And it's funny you should ask that, Sandy, because I was texting with my mom earlier and I was like, we're interviewing a zoo horticulturist later. What should I ask? And that's exactly like, what happens with all the manure? Does it get used for the plants?
Oh yeah, I mean, people seem to think that manure from a giraffe or an elephant or, a zebra or an antelope is somehow magically different than manure from a horse or a cow.
Right.
No,
not so much.
No. We would get calls all the time. Can we have some of that, lion poop, because we got deer in our yard and I'm sure that'll scare them away.
Oh.
No,
Probably not, because probably our deer have never seen a lion.
No, exactly.
Oh,
They
that's
don't
so
care.
interesting.
Neighbors might care, but they don't.
Really?
So no, first of all, I mean, we were prescribed against for any number of reasons to let any of that manure leave the property in its natural
Absolutely.
state. And but people still, I'm sure, call to this day and they want it, but no.
That's too funny. So
I did want to touch a little bit on pest management, just as a, because this is such an this sort of landscape is similar to, I mean, a lot of the zoo, apart from the animal habitats, is similar to a public park or a place, there's lots of families there, or sort of any managed ornamental landscape where you have people sitting and eating and lots of children around. On top of that, you have these animals that you have to protect, and plants in their exhibits, and also the aquarium as well. And so I'm curious, what is the pest management scheme like? I'm sure that it is you have to keep all of these different safety measures in mind and keep exposure extremely low to any toxic products.
Well, yes, as you can well imagine, lots of the zoo staff, from the veterinarian to the keepers, were genuinely concerned about what it is these plant people would be spraying wherever. Because our zoo is sort of compact, we're landlocked in between a major highway, 2 reservoirs, and a community, we can't expand. And so the exhibit tree was designed, and it's pretty close together. So we long ago ascribed to a program called Integrated Pest Management, which I'm sure you've all heard of.
Oh, yes.
So we would, almost without exception, we would use any other means, or the cultural, or even taking certain plants out of the collection, spray them with water, spray them. We would use neem oil. We had negotiated with the curator of the aquarium with lots of tenting and prescriptions, because inside of our aquarium we have tanks that are surrounded by this replication of a river's edge planting in South America, in the Amazon. All of this stuff drips over and grows right above open tanks of fish. And as you can imagine, tropical plants coming from Florida come with hitchhikers. So we did not have an ideal situation all the time to do quarantine. So invariably, we would bring in some plants and do what we could to make sure they were clean, and hold them for a length of time till we could syringe them and let them grow on, so that residual pesticides from the commercial industry were diluted at least, and put them into the exhibit. And invariably, something would hatch out and drive poor Susan to distraction. So in those areas indoors where we could more control the environment, we relied very heavily on cultural practices, syringing, temperature control, soil moisture, and the release of beneficial insects, so that Susan, within probably 2.5 years of time of the new aquarium building, had a resident population of beneficials through very careful monitoring. She was diligent and religious about monitoring, who's there, what are they doing, what life stage are they in? Is it time to act because we've got some bad bugs creeping up, or are the new guys hatching out to meet them? And invariably, with just minimal intervention, she could rely on that residual population of beneficials. In all the exterior landscaping, because of school groups coming in so early, unpredictably, trying to schedule trees spraying or large expansive spraying for outdoor pests just was not really possible. It was either too expensive, or it had to happen just when all the school groups are coming in the spring. It just wasn't going to work. So we basically said, we need to rely on other avenues. And again, sometimes it came down to, this plant needs to be removed from the collection. We cannot control its pest population. It never looks good. It's constantly got something chewing on it or sucking on it, so it's got to go. So a number of the things from the aquarium collection, even though Susan tried, had to be removed because it just was driving us all crazy and costing too much money. And they never, looked good. We did find, though, outside, that the more we transitioned that landscape from one building on a grassy slope with a couple of flower beds with cannas in it into this full acreage full of trees. I mean, I can't even tell you how many trees and shrubs we planted in the years I was there. Suddenly reforested this area, not with fussy hybrids, almost not a single fussy hybrid tree or shrub, but native species, original cultivars. We found, not only did we find lots more birds, but we also found it was rare, and I think Sandy will back me up on this, it was rare that we had an outbreak of some pest that didn't get managed by natural processes within our collection.
Absolutely true.
Yeah. Now, having said that,
I remember those cotoneasters, Frank.
yeah, having said that, though, inside some of the animal holding areas, particularly the primates, as we all are primates, and this may upset some of your listeners, but whenever you have monkeys in a building, no matter what you do, you're going to have cockroaches. It is a fact of life.
Wow.
They will be with us until the end of time.
Oh, they're going to outlive us.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and sometimes people are you're always getting shipments of straw, and you're getting shipments of hay, and getting shipments of produce coming in, and things are here, things are there. Sometimes people get careless. Mice get into buildings. So you have to deal with the mice, because mice carry all kinds of diseases that can easily transfer to primates, including you and I. So that was always a constant battle to keep those in check, and to use methods that were successful, but did not introduce chemicals where the monkeys could get at them, because not only do the monkeys sometimes snatch up small mice to eat them, but smaller monkeys like to snatch up cockroaches and eat them, but not nearly enough to be factored into the control program.
Oh, I see.
So you have to use other methods, and it was always a constant battle. But you can control just so many things. Now, that's where having someone like the plant person, or someone who's specifically designed, empowered at a zoo to be their pest control agent, as part of building design, you can go a great distance to preclude these pests from getting in the first place. And then you also then can limit the number of little voids and crevices and things where they can hide once they get in there. So you have to be diligent. You really have to be diligent all the time, because all these things, not only who wants roaches running around when you're trying to look at ring-tailed lemurs, they can carry diseases too. And so you have to be very diligent about that.
So you can't really go to college and get a degree in zoological horticulture. If somebody is into horticulture and is, hears this and thinks, oh man, that would be such a cool job. How do you go about this?
Well, that's a great question, Sandy. And, the Association of Zoological Horticulture has its own website. And so someone interested in this as a career option should go there and look, because many, many zoos offer internships that a person could do. Many of them are paid internships to help sort of introduce them to the world of zoo horticulture. We are just delighted to get anyone with any background in any form of horticulture to apply. The new program sponsored by Lawn and Gardens, that Seed Your Future program, we were an early supporter of that program, we meaning the Association of Zoological Horticulture. So their website also offers some avenues, but any degree program, whether it's Penn State or Temple or Cornell, that still does ornamental horticulture programming, can give them the basics that they need, both in plant care and pest control for plants, all that sort of necessary things. A good bit of us, though, particularly if you're my age, learned as we went. And we relied on our colleagues at other zoos who've been doing this longer than I have, certainly. So yeah, and I think you're going to find, and I think this goes for plant people in general, but zoo horticulture people are more than happy to answer questions, offer advice and counsel to any person who wants to break into this field. And we have members in almost every state of the union that has a zoo. I mean, if we don't, they more than likely in this day and age have a group of people who are charged to manage the plant collection, because it has now become universally accepted that properly landscaped habitats for animal display in zoos is, first of all, the more humane way to do it, but it's also the better way to get your message across about how important it is to maintain wild spaces for wild animals to live in, and how important these wild spaces are to us as well. So, yeah, I mean, just reach out to anyone who works at a zoo, reach out to anyone listed at the Association of Zoological Horticulture website. It's just azh.org. And up we come. Be glad to help out. And someday maybe there'll be a degree program, although not sure I'll live long enough to see that.
So usually at the end of these, we ask somebody, what you'd like to do when you're not working. But since you're retired, what was your favorite zoo animal?
What was my favorite?
Zoo animal.
Oh. Well, I mean, I'm a cat person. I'm a cat person. And, the first time you get up close and personal with a cheetah, you think, wow, this is like the coolest thing ever. The first time, though, that you get to hold a little tiny clouded leopard, it doesn't get much better than that. Now, having said that, I am not a fan of taking these wild animals and make them tame, and all this unnecessary handling. But with the clouded leopards, this was her first litter. She was herself was very young. She wasn't really up to the job. So we had to pull the cubs, and the keepers had to raise them to a point. And we were fortunate enough to be able to place them then to other facilities where they were integrated into a group, so into a pair. Because apparently clouded leopards mate very, very young.
Oh.
I mean, they sort of grow up and together and become, a mated pair. Whereas lions much later, and only if they have to. Yeah, I mean, to watch them interact. But yeah, the cats were always my favorite things. Always my favorite things.
Oh, that's nice to hear. I'm sure you look at your own house cats in a different way than a lot of people see their cats at home. It's like, I recognize that behavior.
Yeah, it was very interesting to see, having had cats for most of my life, to see how, in fact, similar our house cats are to the larger felids, when they go about their business, how they take naps, how they clean themselves, how they interact with each other, how they interact with their outdoors, how they watch, birds and things. You almost have a wild animal in your house with you.
I think that's very true. I see it. I definitely see it.
Yeah.
Well, Frank, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been such a fun conversation, and we really appreciate you taking the time to talk about your career and such an awesome field within horticulture. So thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Glad to have the opportunity.
Thank you, Frank. Really appreciate it.
Anytime, Sandy.
All right. Take care.
See you.
We'll see you.